Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another Supercoach Insider podcast. My name is Swizz, here with my North Melbourne Team and Supercoach Discussion. And we've got a special guest talking the Roos. There could be nobody else. Big J from the Centre Bounce podcast. How are you, mate?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me on. It's always nice to talk North Melbourne. Slowly becoming more relevant in Supercoach, and hopefully with the likes of Sheasel and whatnot in the team, it's going to get more relevant for the next while.
100%, mate. I know we're talking off air about, I've been listing 6 Supercoach targets, but there's quite a few more that we will cover in this podcast. But before I get into that, as always, check us out on all our social media platforms, in particular the YouTube, Spotify. Get in contact with us via X, Supercoach Insider 100, Swizz26. How can the good people out there, mate, find you?
Mainly on YouTube. So at the Centre Bounce on YouTube, you'll definitely see us there, and then on Twitter as well. We have Facebook and Instagram and stuff, but they're not as big yet.
Yep, no, that's great stuff. And you guys have been pumping out a lot of content once again. So definitely check out that because it is very good stuff. And we'll get a bit of a taste of it here. I've got into a bit of a North Melbourne theme, mate. I've got my Tassie jumper on.
If we're talking about the women's team, sure, but I guess we've got a few Tassie players on the team. Maybe not as many as I would have hoped. But
yeah. All right, so we'll start off as we do with all the programs. We'll look at the first 5 games there. North don't have the early bye, so that does make them appealing. They also have the first bye when we get to the mid-year. So if there's North Melbourne players you aren't starting with, potential ability to trade them in and able to play them through the bye period as well. So on both bye periods, it's actually a really good team for us to be selecting. They kick off with a couple of games at Marvel, the Bulldogs and Melbourne. Probably games that in the past have been probably difficult for the Roos, but just the way the development through some of these young players, you'd be trying to back yourselves as a good chance to get a result in those first 2 games.
Yeah, really depends. I think the Dogs as well, they've had a few players like McRae leave and some fundamental players and some shifts there as well. So generally when that happens, it takes a little while for those teams to get in their groove. So maybe we can steal a cheeky win off the Dogs, but Bont is Bont, right? So you can't really do much against him. Melbourne in a similar way as well. Do Petrarca come into the season firing? Max Gawn, does he trip over? And then they've got a dud Ruckman against Cherry. You just don't know. So yeah, it's a tough couple of games to start with. We're not versing too many worse teams, but we want a challenge, right? We don't want to be like, cool, we can lock in the 2 games against West Coast every year and then they're the only wins. So we need to compete. We need to do well. And they're at Marvel. I love home games.
Yeah, and it could be way worse. Like you could be starting off with like a Lions or a Geelong or something like that. So against teams who are pretty well mid-table. In Melbourne, we're obviously down a little bit further, and Gawn's got his issues at the moment. We know Petrarca and Oliver. Yeah, so that if the North bring the improvement that we've seen, like especially that game against the Pies last year for a half, if that's the standard they roll into the start of the season, it's not going to be an easy matchup for those first 2 teams. Even the Crows, it's an away game, but another team that has had its issues over the last couple of years. And looking to bounce back. The Swans will be hard, but at least that's at home. And then the Suns at the Barossa, which is a real, that's probably a real 50-50 game because who knows how the Barossa Valley is going to play as a footy ground.
Yeah, definitely. I think at the moment for next year, we'll probably talk about results and whatnot later on, but it's the young kids pushing them and it's the old guys being able to cover the young kids pushing. So if they can do that, I think we're going to upset a few more teams. And as you say, there were a few close games and some games that we probably should have won. So if we can if we can take a win or 2 off these teams, we're doing pretty well. No one will expect us. So,
yep. And even those doubles, like it could be worse. Like I'm sure you would have loved West Coast in there as well, but obviously you've got the
can't do it 4 years in a row.
And the game where you're hosting them over there, but it's if you think what potential teams that could be in that sort of bottom 6, bottom 8 area, we know the Tigers are going to definitely be at the foot of the table. The Crows and D's were down there last year, probably a chance to be around that mark again this year. Bulldogs have been, as much as they've got the list, always seem to be a mid-table team. So it's really sort of the improving Carlton, and then the Swans could be, people are predicting that they could slide this year. New coach, the disappointment from the grand final. They've still got the quality that you would think they would be up there, but we've seen this in history that teams, they can struggle coming off a defeat like they had. So of sort of those double games, I think it's not too bad from a North Melbourne perspective.
Yeah, we probably beat Richmond, and Richmond probably guaranteed. It's going to be fun seeing Luke Parker playing his old team twice, though.
Yeah, exactly.
And Caleb Daniel.
Yeah, well, that's right. And that's obviously why you've probably got a couple of those games as well, because of the new recruits that you've got that we'll cover a little bit more in a second. What are your expectations going into this season as a North fan, mate? What are you expecting to see?
A lot of people seem to confuse ladder position with wins on the table. And yes, they do correlate quite well together, but you've got some seasons where you've got two teams that just demolish everyone, end up on 23 wins. And then everyone else is kind of fighting for 4th to like 11th. And then generally they're on the same even. So I always say wins. If North Melbourne can double their wins, if North Melbourne, I'm looking for about 8 wins in a season. Now, next year, or this year, if that means that, cool, we're 15th on the ladder, because that's what we've seen in previous years. Okay, our ladder position hasn't been great. Not a great improvement, but in terms of wins, we've won a lot more games. If 8 wins now turns into 11th on the ladder because 8 wins is like the top 8 are so close, then sure, that's even better for us. But I think 8 wins is the way to go. We could have won probably 6 games. That Pies game, for example, there are a couple of others through there, some shocking last quarter losses that hopefully the mature age players coming through will be able to stop. I mean, Luke Parker's not going to let us do another Pies, I'll tell you what. So, yeah, if we can avoid those a little bit, I think we'll scare a few teams. At least it'll be a lot closer and more exciting games. There won't be blowouts, I hope.
Yeah, I'm slightly the opposite on the fact that it's not wins for me, but I actually look at more the percentage. So North Melbourne last year, 63.5%. I'd be wanting that getting close to that 90 mark, which shows that you might not be winning games, but you're not getting blown out as well, and that's the first thing. You stop the blowouts, and then if you're losing games by 4 or 5 goals, but then you're still snagging anything between sort of 3 and 8 wins, but at least you might have even blown 1 or 2 teams out there and actually got a handy win, like you potentially could have against like sort of Collingwood last year. That percentage will come in, and you look at the teams like the Adelaide, as you said, like 15th last year, only had they did have that 8-win mark, so finished as low as 15, but their percentage was nearly 100. So I think that's the big growth there for North. If they can put 20-30% on what they did last year, that's I think a big step in the right direction.
Yeah, hopefully that means that we steal a couple more wins than maybe what we wouldn't have got.
Yep, exactly. All right, so the team that I've got there for potentially the round one, there's a lot of water to go under the bridge before the season does kick off, so there could be some injuries, but it looks like there are some players that potentially that Big J might pick up that are out of this side, that which probably shows that North are starting to develop some depth there. So I've got Core, Logue, Archer, the new player Caleb Daniel from the Doggies, Comben, who really showed his skills playing down the back line for probably the first time last year. Bit of a revelation there for North, and the pillars that they're going to need to build this future. McKercher, who could be anywhere really, could be on the wing, could be in the midfield, but I've stuck him at half-back for now. Scott, LDU in his contract year. Dylan Stevens on the other wing. Simpkin, Larky, Parker. Lukey Parker, an absolute superstar player on and off the field. Half forward, can play in that midfield, will really help educate the players on and off the field. Curtis Darling has come over as experienced player from West Coast. Zuha, and then the Tristan Cherry, big machine in the ruck, absolutely superstar year. I've got him listed there, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him as one of the more highly owned players going in the start of the year. Wardlaw, Sheasel, and then I've got McDonald, Powell, Dersma, and the Swan. He's been on the list for a couple of years up there. He was a first-round draft pick in Jacob Constanti, and Zach Fisher's the sub because, why not?
Yeah.
Thoughts there, mate?
It's not a bad team. There's a few players that I think will need to move around, and probably some of those guys in the last 18 to 23 spots as well. I either I have a feeling McCurch will line up on the wing to start, which means Dylan Stevens gets put back to VFL. The club weren't super happy with him, I think, and that's why we kind of made a few changes that we did. And they want McCurch to run around, so that's kind of where it is. I think there's been a bit of a push as well for guys like Hardiman to come into the team, and he naturally plays off halfback as well, is an actual defender instead of playing mids in that kind of position and trying to run them there. So he'll most likely rotate through those positions. The rest of the team doesn't look terrible. I would probably be dropping. Bryn Teagle needs to play. I think his chop out with Cherry was okay. And what it does mean is it means Larky and Darling can actually play as key forwards and not have to play somewhere else. So to have that second ruck option is important. God forbid Cherry gets injured at the start of a game and then you just don't have a ruckman as well. A lot of fans hoping that McDonald doesn't play. He's finally getting kicked out of the team. A lot of people feeling like the fact that he was second captain alongside Jai Simpkin kind of kept him into the side a lot longer than maybe he should have. Zach Fisher.
Yeah, I'll butt in there just for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
I've seen a few teams that still have him listed starting on the field at half back, and I was just like, I thought he probably still might deserve a spot starting the season, but it was nearly borderline putting him as sub.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think around that mark, maybe he's probably best 22, but like number 22. Yeah. I think Fisher's back to the VFL, and we need a small forward. We'll see what happens with Constanti. I know that when we got him over from Sydney, he was still dealing with some foot issues. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, overall, the team doesn't look too bad.
Yeah, the ins it just feels like it's the experience that you needed just to help out some of these younger players. So, they're not going to be world beaters like they were earlier in their career, but yeah, you just can see that they're there to help educate and just take a little bit of the pressure off the developing youngsters.
I think Riley Hanson Jr. as well might feature over Constanti to start with. He played a couple of games last year, so they might just reward that kind of continuation there.
Yep. And as I said, that's probably a good thing because some of these other guys are the kind of nearly the dead wood these days are getting pushed out further and further because there's players there who can take that opportunity. So that's only a good thing for North Melbourne and their future. Mm-hmm. All right, going forward, Supercoach targets. I've put the main man to start off with in defence, 635k. He hasn't left my side since Supercoach Gold opened. And I think this is the last year we get him as a defender, a bit like Nick Dacos the year before, and that's Harry Sheasel, mate. What can you tell us about the great man?
What can you say? I mean, he's 19, and then the next year he's 635k. Like, the kid's phenomenal. He's probably, I'm going to say, one of the better players in the league. I mean, we've got Bond, we've got a few other guys, but definitely young talent coming through. It's probably Harry Sheasel, especially for the previous under 20-year-olds group. They'll play him anywhere. They'll get him around the ball. You've seen how good skills and whatnot he has. If you don't have him in your team, you're going to struggle. And the beautiful thing about North Melbourne, as we said before, they have no early bye. So you can carry these players the entire game and you're going to get, 11 fantastic games out of Sheasel and then a break and then, 12 other fantastic games. Hopefully there's no foot injury. So, yeah, he's a lock in my team. I think most people might end up having him as one of their most expensive players, and it's warranted. Like, he might drop 50k at one point and then go back and then end up more expensive than this. So you kind of go for the ride a little bit, but we're going to have Harry Sheasel, Swizz, for the rest of our Supercoach careers for the next 10 years, I think.
Yeah, I think it very much. She's on Dacos will be 1 and
Yeah.
2 in that midfield for a long time to come. Like I'm always looking at players how they finish the year. It's not like he had the drop off. You know, okay, 75 against Sydney at the SCG, but that's pretty standard around the competition. But yeah, 138, 160, 105, and 122 in that last month. Just the cream on the crop for that season average of 118. So
Yep.
yeah, for a guy that is going to play in the guts, and we're getting him as a defender. Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer, even at 635k.
I think so as well.
Yeah. I'll move on. Well, actually, I've got a player that's not listed that I know you'll want to talk about. And he was on part of my Supercoach targets. He just got squeezed out of the main 6 here. But we do have another guy listed in defence, and that is McKercher.
Yeah, I love Colby McKercher. I think he's fantastic. I think he's probably one of the better players that were drafted last year. Dominates, has busted his ass in the preseason and has done very, very well. North will put him around the ball as much as they can, but they love him to run as well, which is why I think he'll play halfback wing with some time in the midfield. For his type of player, that's fantastic. The kid's got bullet pass kicks. Better than Lawson Humphreys, who I think is phenomenal at doing those kind of things. So, yeah, 465k against some of the other options around that price rise. Wait till the preseason, but I do think that he's a more solid choice compared to some of those other ones. Like, I would be more happy to pick him over a Roberts, over a Farrell, even, and a few of these other ones, just for how good he is. And he'll be a primo next year. Like, this will be the last time that you can pick up McKercher, barring injury, of course, that you'll be able to pick him up at sub 500k.
Yep. No, I like that, mate. Okay, moving into the midfield now. It's at the end of the year, out of contract, gun midfielder is in LDU. We know, obviously, clubs are going to be coming fast for him, and there is that little bit of worry if he probably wasn't re-signed by half year, but talking to a few North supporters, some of them are thinking, well, depending on how he goes, and if it's another kind of injury interrupted year, it might not be the world's worst thing, depending on the development of Wardlaw, Sheasel, Dersma, McKercher. The list goes on and on and on and on and on, because those midfield spots are going to dry up pretty soon as you continue to bring in more. The talent that you've got continues to develop. In saying that, keeping him and letting him dominate that midfield while we're around these guys for the next 5 years would be obviously the priority. And we know players coming out of contract always seem to find that little bit extra. Is this LDU somebody that tempts you, even though we know he's had those injury issues for a while?
I mean, if you're a Brisbane fan and you said, "Oh, it's okay to trade Neil and Dunkley because you've got Ashcroft coming through," I mean, come on, guys, like, not the right way to look at things, right? You have the good players because you've got the good players. So LDU's not leaving. He's told the club, he's told everyone, "Hey, I'm staying." I'd be very, very shocked if he doesn't. Just for what he's been saying, basically, and the way he's been acting and whatnot. In terms of Supercoach, he's always been around the mark, but I feel like it's been a case of he's been our best midfielder, so he's always got the attention, and the rest of the midfield hasn't been able to keep up with him. Hence the poorest scoring in some games. With a few other targets in there with some more consistency, I mean, this guy could be 650k very, very easy. He's got the potential to drop some monster scores. I'm just quickly having a look at his scoring from last year, Swizz. Boy, oh boy, there is some big scores in there. So the guy can do it. He just needs that consistency around. And I think as we get more competitive, it's going to happen. So let me just pull up last year's stats. 1 second.
Yeah, I've got them here, mate.
Yeah, 133s, 152, 148, 147. Like, we know the capacity to score very well is there. And he doesn't need 40 touches to do it, because he has been working on as well his ability to kick goals in the off season. So it's not so much just get possessions and hand it off. He can be that guy that gets possessions, runs through, and then does it. I feel like his type of midfielder needs to have the capacity as well to rest forward, just to kind of do something a little bit different instead of being on the bench all the time. So, yeah, we might get a little bit of extra scoring that way and some more goals throughout the year.
Yeah, I strongly believe if he could play the 23 games and
Yep.
not be interrupted of injury, there's no reason why he couldn't be the number one super coach player come the end of the season. The
Yep.
problem is we know he's had a history where, and it's not many, but you only have to do it a couple of times to be laid out where you then frustrate the super coach community. And it
Yes.
has happened
Yep.
before where it's
Yep.
absolutely blown up the super coach app. And that is the worry because, you know, the old saying, fool me once, fool me twice, and
Yeah.
that's the only thing in the back of the mind that thinks, oh, I don't want to be caught out again. But geez, the guy can play, and he's fun to watch. So yeah, and the best part about it is, yeah, he can be a great vice captain option. Like if Northup got any games on a Saturday, which even just listed there, we've got there's 3 on that list.
Mm.
Yeah, he's there against any team. He can be a vice captain option.
We've got a few Thursdays and Friday night games this year as well, so there's definitely things there. And I always stand to these players with like 3-letter last names. It's fun to say LDU, instead of Neil or Sheasel or whatever. LDU. So
Yes.
that always kind of jumps out a little bit as well.
And in regards for the other end, a rookie going to potentially make his debut round 1. Actually, I didn't end up fitting him in that side that I had in the best 23, but I wouldn't surprise me. He could start at sub, he could start on the field. They might just give him time to develop in the VFL for a couple of weeks. So
there's no pressure.
There is no pressure, and that's why originally I didn't have him in the round 1 lineup because there's no rush. It's not like they have to just throw these kids in now. They can give them a few games in the VFL to develop. I don't think they want the same sort of a bit like Dersma came in. And it probably did struggle in those first few games. I don't know if North want an exact repeat of that, but it's probably a little bit easier now that it's probably got a little bit more support around him, and compared to obviously Dersma's first couple of games there, and it's just tough because you'd expect Sutherland to be starting up the forward line unless they go that they have gone Sheasel and then McKercher, who were both midfielders at half back. Could they go the three times in a row and shove a Finner Sutherland down there? I think that's less unlikely, but you never know. They've got the history of doing it. So even at 199k, this kid's very talented. He's not going to be like the massive ball winner. I think he's the sort of guy that's going to probably get you eventually maybe 20 touches, but the 20 touches are going to be all class. I
think he's going to be a little bit like how Darcy Wilson was, running up and down the wing, kind of getting a few touches, but maybe not the super accumulator. He's never really been that type of player during juniors as well. He'll have 20 touches, but they'll be really good. I think that may scare a few people away, and it has for me at the moment, with the likes of Draper and potentially a Jagger Smith and maybe Ashcroft and a few others as well. Guys who are going, they're going to do really well. And there's just a lot of cooks in the kitchen at North Melbourne. Like you say, there's no pressure. It's not like 2 years ago where every ball was going through Harry Sheasel because he was the best player on field. Like Finn O'Sullivan might just be sub, and you're not paying that at 199k. The kid's phenomenal. Don't get me wrong. He's going to be great. But in terms of super coach, cool.
Yep, 100%. Moving into the rucks, as I said earlier, I would not be surprised if one of the more highly owned players, even at 645. Apologies to MJ who told me last year, get on Cherry early. He's going to have a phenomenal year, and he did. Like it was solid enough to start off with. There was some low tons, and at least the floor was like sort of 90s. And then when he got going in that second half of the year, there were some ridiculously high scores. So he's got the ceiling there. It's a good floor. An absolute beast, nearly average 120. He's tapping down to a pretty good young midfield. There might not be exactly improvement there. You might be getting what you're paying for. It might be even a 5-point drop, but I still think he could be still the number one ruckman in the league come season.
Most definitely. I mean, Cherry should have been all Australian. I know there were a couple of people saying other people should have, and they obviously did towards the end of it. I think there's a bit of anti-North bias. If Cherry did his performance and played for Richmond or another team that was a bit higher on the ladder, he probably would have won it. But yeah, the guy's a beast. I mean, we've spoken about it on stream. He went from an 80 average the year before to a 120 plus, and yeah, it's phenomenal. I think there's a little bit of conversation at the moment about North's midfield getting better, which means that maybe Cherry doesn't get as many tackles. But on the opposite end of that as well, he's going to get a lot more hit outs to advantage, which is the same type of scoring as well. So it may be a little bit of a drop. Maybe he gets a bit more focus, but Cherry's put on a tiny bit of size as well, and the fitness gets better every year in the preseason. So yeah, I think, as you said, appropriately priced, but if you could lock in a 645K player and say every week you're most likely going to get a 120, you probably will lock in that type of player, and that's what we're going to get out of Cherry. And a good buy round as well.
And he'll be pretty well 26 when the season starts. That's prime for Ruckman. Perfect size, and he also is either a vice captain or a captain option. And we obviously want plenty of them. So he's a guy who can put out one for like that last 5 games. I think he averaged 148, 149, something like that. So imagine able to lock that in on a Saturday as your vice captain.
I'm very happy that St Kilda did not offer us a second rounder when Cherry was up on the trade table. They only wanted to give us a third, and that meant we kept Cherry. Because he's number 1 ruck for a reason, right?
Yeah, 100%. Okay, the 2 new guys that have come into the club, both very different players, but so one's going to slot into your back line, which is Caleb Daniel. The other one into your forward line, Luke Parker. Parks might have a stint through the midfield here and there, but 343K for Luke Parker, 269 for Caleb Daniel. Are you looking at either of these, mate?
Well, I think if Caleb Daniel is not close to 100% owned in Supercoach, you're not really playing Supercoach, right? Like, there's nuffy teams that'll be like, oh, Caleb Daniel, or they'll pick their favorite players, or maybe make a round 12 buy team, so you can't put Daniel in your team. But we know how well he did at the Dogs in that halfback position a couple of years ago before the likes of Bailey Dale kicked him out. But he's come to North Melbourne every training session, halfback. Fitness is there. Everything is there. Bull point passes again. Caleb Daniel should be a 500K primo by the end of it. And if you do not start him, you're in a lot of trouble.
We got a little bit unlucky because they played him those last 2 games and he got a 97 and 107. It boosted his average by 8. Like he should have. He was averaging 40. Well, he was averaging 42 at that stage. Yep. So, we could have got him ended up getting his average up to 50. So, it was a bit frustrating for people who were hoping that he was going to move on. But there were plenty of sub-affected games. But like the non-sub-affected games is what we were really looking at. And there was still last year a 70, 73, 75, and obviously those 2 scores at the end that we talked about. And it wasn't that long ago where he was just absolutely dominating for the Bulldogs off that halfback role. 2023, we had a 92 average, but again, halfway through the years, we hit the bye. That was 104. And then the year before that, it was again still 90. So he's a guy that, we're getting it at 50 potentially, even if it's 30 points under, it's making money. But it's an improvement on what we had with Zach Fisher last year and Aaron Hall in the sense that of his body. And, every year North keep giving us one of these guys. We had Jack Zeeble. So we're pretty blessed with how North treats us when it comes to Supercoach and their defenders who play forward in our game. So, absolutely lock in our teams.
Yeah, definitely. I think North Melbourne have brought him in to play that position. So they're not going to put him anywhere. They're not going to do a bevo and be like, oh, today you're a small forward. Next week you're a ruckman. Like, come on, guys. Luke Parker's an interesting one. Joe currently has him in his team. I'm a little bit apprehensive with the selection. I think there's better choices around that mark. You got Philippou, Bailey Smith, a few others. My only thing with him as well is I think alongside Jai Simpkin, he's going to rotate through that midfield and be the second round of midfield forwards that play through there. Does that affect his scoring enough as well? He's probably good for an 80 average. He might have games like he did in the grand final where he kicks 3 and dominates, and cool. That's fine. But in terms of Supercoach in our forward lines, I think there's better options.
Yeah, I'm not as hot on the pick as well. I don't think, because I know some people have been saying, he's going to get midfield time and all stuff. I'm like, well, yeah, as you said, it's second rotation, but even then, there's probably games where, depending on how they line up and who they want to give time, like we've just talked about McKercher. There's no reason why they might not give McKercher some time. Powell, does Phillips make his way back in? Even does young Dersman get an opportunity? What happens when Fino Sutherland comes in? So depending on kind of where North's at different times of the season, they'll need his experience and bigger body. And he's as tough as nails. So they'll want him in there. There'll be other times where I think it's maybe even against like you kind of maybe Richmond's, Melbourne's, whatever, they might go, yeah, you know what, we're going to just back in the young fellas today. So
yeah,
I think the scores are going to yo-yo, which is never great for Supercoach for those mid prices, because a couple of weeks he might put up 100 and then the next week he puts up a 40, and it just stunts any sort of cash growth that we can get out of him.
Yeah, maybe for like draft, if you've got a late round pick and things like that, chuck him in your team, no dramas. But I think for generic traditional Supercoach, there's just better options at cheaper prices.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. All right, mate, well, we've gone through that part of the list. Is there anybody else on the list that you'd like to bring up?
There's definitely a couple. Hardeman, as I mentioned before, in the back line is definitely one to have a look at. I do think that at some point they're going to play him, and it might even be from round one. Let me just check the price, 167K, so could be an option down there if he's best 22. Competing with Josh Godar, Miller Bergman in there, but I think Hardeman, just being like that type of player as he is, the more set defender, definitely could be an option. But then again, there's other defenders who you probably pick against him as well. In the midfield, maybe not so much outside of Sullivan, but one to watch, and it might be middle of the year, but Luke Urquhart. We picked him up with a late selection. Speaking to a lot of people, if he worked on his kicking, he could be a top 10 pick. And from the type of player that I'm seeing him being in the preseason, how much North is actually wanting him to play and the positions they're putting him in, they're very, very, very happy with the selection. He could even feature round one if he keeps up with the way he's going. So really nice midfield bull type player. Tom Powell's always had issues with maybe not being the best midfielder, maybe not being the best forward, kind of in the middle. Urquhart could take that kind of spot. No one really in the ruck. I mean, Cherry's a god. In the forward line, I mean, you can always pick Toby Pink if you're a bit keen, but there's the likes of Constanti as well. Braden George, if he ever gets fit, might be a selection this year or next year. We've got 2 years left on the contract. Similar thing with Hanson Jr. I think that he'll play. There's just better selections. And then Matt Whitlock, a few people have picked him up. The guy, controversially, that we got from Richmond for his pick. There you go, Swizz. You're very happy with him. I don't think we're going to play him as a forward. It looks like we're playing him as a defender. So we'll see what happens. But there's no way he's going to feature early.
Yeah, no, and we ignore key tools like that.
He's a good player.
There will be no problems, but it's not usually the Supercoach relevant. In saying that, Comben did have a nice little run for us, but
yeah.
So
intercept defenders are good.
Exactly. The couple that I'll point out is Jai Simpkin, not for your starting teams, definitely to look at in a draft, because he did obviously come in last year as a bit slow to get going, but once he got going, still managed to get an 80 average. If there is a North Melbourne injury, he is somebody then we need to consider for our classic sides. If it is one of those big three in Wardlaw, Shees, or LDU, because if one of them go out, he is most likely to go in. And he did score. There were periods last year where he scored 120. Yeah, had an absolutely great run. 129, 114, 110, 99, 114, 95. And the big thing is he's a forward in Supercoach for us. So that's why he's. You've got to watch him to see what happens with this North Melbourne side, because if there are injuries, very handy forward player and good for our drafts. And another one who's going to be a real late smoky for your drafts, especially in deeper ones, just have a little look at Nick Larkey, especially if you if your draft league adds like a flex position or something this year, there's nothing wrong with taking a risk of a key forward who's probably going to get a lot more delivery, and on any given league can deliver you a big score. He's going to put in his 30s and 40s, which is not great, but that's if your draft league particularly has a flex position. The guys like Larky now actually become a little bit more into vogue, where before you just never look at them.
Yeah, I think as well, where last year was very low level of scoring, we could most likely, depending on how the team goes and how many goals Darling pinches off him, could end up being, a 60, 70 goal season again.
Yeah, and that's what he's needed, some support down there and a little bit better delivery, and I'm sure he'll get it this season. Well, that's all I think for North Melbourne, mate. It's if you're a North supporter out there, I think you're probably excited. This is you've gone through the hard yards of the last few years, and starting to head in the right direction with how the list build's been going.
Yeah, finally have some depth, and we touched on that a little bit with Fisher, but it feels nice to be able to say, cool, this experienced player we've brought in now can play VFL, and the sky's not falling down. So good to have North in that way, and got a lot of young players, a lot of first-round picks, Swizz, that are finally coming into their prime. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. And as much as I don't think it's going to be crazy, like some North fans have been saying to me, like, "Oh, we might make the A to that," but it's it's the small steps, and you're going to definitely see improvement. And it might not be this year where you make the big jump, but it'll be enough improvement where you can see, it'll be coming.
Definitely, I think so too.
All right, so leave us a comment. Let us know if there's any North Melbourne players that you're looking at, or any questions you've got in regards to the North Melbourne team going forward. Big J, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
No problems. And continue to support and check us out, and check out the Centre Bounce crew. They do a great job. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
Catch you.